Okay, it's lesson 5, part 3. So we've done quite a bit of setup today. We've talked about NoSQL and MongoDB. We've set it up, and we've now added the Mongoose package. And we've added code in our app.js that will read our MongoDB connection string and use Mongoose to connect. So if you've missed anything, it's all up for you on GitHub. I've restored my credentials, so now I'm connected to MongoDB. So we've used views and we've used controllers. I now want to create a models folder, and I want to create an artist model that we can use to interact with our artist collection that we have here in our database. So I'm going to create a new directory called models. So this would be similar to what we got in Visual Studio when we were doing .NET MVC. And then in here, we're going to create a model. I'm going to create a simple class for an artist. So inside the models folder, I'm going to create a new JavaScript file called artist. And the convention here in Node is it's going to be singular, just like in Java and C#, but also all lowercase for the file name. So in here, we need to link to Mongoose. So we want to define a schema for artists. So I'll create a variable called artist schema, and it's going to be a new Mongoose schema. Excuse me. So this is going to be a class, a model, but it's going to be used by Mongoose for interacting with the artist collection in our database. So our schema is going to be super simple. And we just define the schema like everything else in Node. We just define it in JSON. So we're going to have a name attribute. That's a string. Actually, sorry, we'll do it this way. We'll do it as a little JSON object. So name. So our type is going to be a string. And our required is going to be set to true. So you cannot create a new artist if the name is empty. We could also add here trim as true. So we can't create an artist that just has spaces, or if there's spaces on the beginning or end, when we save that artist name, any space, leading or trailing spaces will get trimmed off. So very simple. Our model basically only has one property, just has a name. We might modify this schema later. We're just going to start really simple. And lastly, we will make this model public. So we'll use module.export as we've used a few times already. So we're going to define this as a Mongoose model with the name of artist. So we're exporting our schema. So we're going to create and define our schema, and then we're exposing it, we're exporting it, making it public to the rest of the application with the name of artist. So in our controllers, we'll refer to the artist class, the artist model. And this schema, this provides a template for what does an artist document look like. So even though we don't have a schema in the database itself, the schemas are defined in our model classes. So here's all the code. We'll make some other models later. We'll make an albums model. If we have time, we might do a songs model. We'll see. But we'll just keep this really simple for now. Does anybody have any questions about our model? Shouldn't be too complicated with all the courses you guys have done in MVC and Intro to Objects. You're familiar with building classes. So this is really just a Node Express class object. Okay, so what are we going to do with this? We want to modify our artist index view so that when users click on artists, we're going to use that model to query our artist collection, fetch the artist documents, and then display the artist names here in a table or a grid or something like that. So where will we need to go in order to enable that functionality? We're going to have to modify two different files in our project so that this page can display data from MongoDB. Which two files do we want to change? Yep, that's right, Adam. We need to modify the artist controller. And so that'll handle the logic part of this. Yeah, that's right. We'll need to also modify the view, the artist index view, right? Chris, Simon, Adam, you guys got it. So let's deal with the controller first. So we'll go to our artist controller. So we're going to keep the code that's here. When we have a request at the root of artist, we're going to render this view, but we're going to add on to this. So we want to add a model reference. Oops, we got to go up one level to our models. So we've now got a reference. So I guess this should be let. So we'll just make this global. This reference will be global everywhere in the controller because we'll add more methods in here. All of them are going to use that same artist model. So now before we call the res.render statement, we want to use the artist model to query MongoDB. So what does this look like? Use artist model to fetch all documents from artists collection in MongoDB. So we can call artist.find. So you can see there's a whole bunch of find methods built into Mongoose because artist inherits from Mongoose schema. We've got find, so this will basically get all the documents. We've got find and delete, find one, find and update, find by ID. So there's a whole bunch of find methods we can call. If we want everything with no filter, we just call the basic find. And now we're going to have a callback in here. There are two things that might happen when we try to query the database. What are the two possible results we could get when we try to find all the artist documents? Yeah, exactly, Adam. We could get documents back, or we might get an error. So our callback has two parameters, an error or some data that we'll call artists. So here's our callback. So now we can evaluate. So our two parameters are air or artists. If we get an error, we will just call console.log. We'll print out the error. We'll also call res.end. We can send the error to the browser. Otherwise, if we don't get an error, so this condition is false, but we actually get back some documents, we're going to move our res.render statement into the else. So if we have an error, log it and print it. If we have no error, we want to display our view. But we need to add some code here, right? Not only do we want to display the view, but we also want to pass it this list of artists data so we can display it. So what we'll do here is let's add a key called artists and a value called artists. So our callback, when we call artist find, if it finds documents, it populates this artist variable. We're then going to render the view and we're going to pass this list of artists. So here's our method now. So whenever we call find, our first callback parameter would be an error, and our second callback parameter will be any data that we're retrieving. So I can run this, load this again in my browser. We won't see any changes, but if the page refreshes successfully, that's a good clue that it hasn't crashed. If we get an error message, we know that this query failed. So I've refreshed, NodeMon restarted, I'm still connected to the database, so that's good. So now when I click on artists, okay, my page reloads, so there's no error showing up. So it runs a GET request, it refreshes. There's no error here, so that's a good clue that this code is working and we are successfully retrieving some documents from the database. So this is step one, right? Use our model, and then in our controller method, use the model to query the database and pass the data to the view. So we've done the first part of this, or I guess we've done 2 of 3 parts. We've created the model. We've used the model in our controller to query MongoDB, and we are sending the JSON data to our artist index view. So now, as Adam and Chris suggested, Chris and Simon suggested, we now need to go ahead and modify this artist index view so we can loop through and display the artist data that's here. So we're going to open up under views, artists, and index. We can add some code here for this. So in this case, let's think, how do we want to do this? Do we want a table? Just going to mull this over for a minute. Do we want to use a card view? Maybe we'll just start with a bulleted list. So we'll put on a UL. And now we're going to use a loop in HBS or handlebars syntax So we can loop through, we can iterate through this list of artists. So I'll open up my handlebar tags, and we can use the number sign each artists. And my code editor automatically closes the tag. So in here, we're going to print out an li tag, and then we can use the keyword this. So inside the loop, we're going to print out the artist name. So this would be similar to the for each loop that we've used in PHP or in ASP.NET. We're looping through this artist JSON object that comes from the controller, and then we can reference the individual items and the name properties. So how does this look at runtime? So now we get a bulleted list with the same documents that we found in MongoDB. So here's our first controller method in Vue, where we're successfully interacting with MongoDB in our Node and Express application. And we're using the MVC structure. Our Mongoose model talks to the database. Our controller uses the model to run the query. And then the controller loads a view, passes the data to the view, and our view is using handlebar syntax to display the data. We've tried to keep the data really simple so we don't get bogged down in the weeds with it. I want to make one other small change here. Notice my browser tab. On my home page, it says Node Tunes. On About, it says About this site. But when I go to Artists, it just shows the URL. Because on those other views we built last week, we passed in a page title variable in our controller method. We haven't done that here. So it just shows the raw URL. There's no friendly search engine title. So I want to change that. I'm going to go back to the artist.js controller. And in our res.render statement here on lines 19 to 21, not only are we passing the artist data, but I also want to pass a page title. So I'm going to add on to this little JSON object. So we're passing in a page title here as well. So now when I refresh, instead of showing the URL, my browser tab, which the search engines are going to read, is going to say artists. So our res.render statement has got the name of the view. And now in the options, we're passing in two options in our JSON object, the artist data as well as the page title. Did I lose anybody? Anybody have questions? Okay. Ray, you're watching along. Okay, so several of you saying your database is connected, but you don't get the output. Okay, first question, if there's no data, is there data in your database? Yep, okay, that's fine. So check in Compass that you've got data here, number one. And that your collection is called artists. Because the model automatically looks for that name. right? We never told the model what collection to look in. If the model's called artist, it looks for a collection called artists, plural, and lowercase. So Jason, Chris, that's the first thing to check. Okay, it's lowercase and it's artists. All right, good. Another thing you can try to debug it here, if it's not showing up, is before your res.render statement here in the else, you could try logging out. Right? You could log out the data, and this will show you if your query is getting anything back and print it out. So if I add this console.log here before the res.render statement, and now I refresh, notice it shows me the JSON data in my console. So this tells me whether my query is working successfully. So is the data coming from the database to the model and the model to the controller? Okay, so if yours is an empty array, we know the problem is not here, right? It's not in the res.render or in your handlebar syntax. The problem is somewhere here, something is missing. I will just stop mine for a minute. I'll push my code to Git so you can also check yours with mine, okay? So if there's data in MongoDB, but your controller is not getting it, then something is wrong. Something's gone wrong either in your controller method or in your model. Because when you log out the data, you should get a JSON object with your 3 documents. So at least we know the problem is on the query end of things. It's not in the display end. The data is never getting to the view. So I've pushed my code. So if yours is empty, you can check your model code and your controller code against mine. We still have a bit of time. I'd like to do one more thing, which is set up the ability to add a new artist. I'll leave this up to you. We've covered a fair bit today. It's 1:30. We'll need a simple form with a get and post method. Any thoughts? Do you want to, I know you do have your assignment to do. If you'd like to stop here and start with that next week, we can. If you want to continue with adding an artist today, we can do that. Any thoughts from anybody, what you'd like to do? Okay, thanks for the feedback, Jillian. Any other thoughts? Do you want to carry on with adding a new artist? Do you want to push that to next week? Okay, well, we'll build the form to do it. So I won't add anybody else unless we're going to write the code and build the form. All right, so I've gotten a few suggestions that we pause for now. People want to do assignment 1. So I'm going to stop the recording. I've already pushed everything we've done today to GitHub. So I can stay in the room for a little bit if people have questions or need a bit of help. And then we will resume with adding, updating, and deleting from our artist library next week. And then we'll also look at performing CRUD operations with albums as well. So we can have artists and albums working together. Okay, so all your code is on GitHub already. Recordings will be uploaded a little later today. Good luck with your assignment and enjoy your long weekend. I will stay in the room for a little bit if people have some questions.